But me as a parent, I'm very upset.
Leon El-Alamin was no stranger to Michigan. Once hailed as a shining example of rehabilitation, El-Alamin earned the admiration of voters through his story of redemption from convicted felon to elected lawmaker. His past was heavy: drug trafficking, illegal weapons, and a federal prison sentence. But after his release, he founded a nonprofit to help formerly incarcerated individuals reintegrate into society and became a vocal advocate for criminal justice reform. In the eyes of the public, he symbolized the American comeback. Media outlets praised him as a success story. When elected to the Michigan House of Representatives, El-Alamin didn't just represent the people of Flint, he stood for everyone who had once been incarcerated and now sought a second chance. He was also one of the first individuals to have his criminal record fully expunged under Michigan's Clean Slate Act, a groundbreaking law meant to clear the path for reformed citizens. But on the 10th of July, 2025, that carefully constructed image began to crumble. Police received a distress call from an anonymous woman in East Flint. She claimed El-Alamin had assaulted and choked her during a heated argument. When officers arrived, they found visible injuries on her neck and arms consistent with her account. El-Alamin was arrested on the spot and charged with felony domestic assault. The news shook Michigan. The man who had once stood as a reformer was now facing the same justice system he had helped shape. Media headlines no longer called him inspiring. They labeled him a state rep arrested for choking woman. No one expected the man who publicly declared he had left violence behind to now be accused of it himself. Public opinion splintered. Some said it was a tragic downfall of a once promising leader. Others warned against rushing to judgment. But one question hung over everything. Was this just a momentary loss of control, or had Leon El-Alamin's past never really let him go? If you're following this story on Echoes of the Court, subscribe now so you won't miss the next development in this case or any of the courtroom dramas we cover. Every case is a window into justice, people, and the secrets they try to hide. Leon El-Alamin once described himself as a man reborn from darkness. His early life unfolded in Flint, Michigan, a city weighed down by unemployment, gun violence, and a drug trade that thrived in the shadows of poverty. At age 20, he was convicted of drug distribution and illegal firearm possession, leading to nearly 7 years in federal prison. Behind bars, he witnessed brutality, isolation, and racial tension. But it was also where he began to change, reading philosophy, law, and religion, and seeking a path out of the cycle. After his release, El-Alamin founded the MAID Institute, a nonprofit dedicated to helping the formerly incarcerated reintegrate into society. He preached in churches, led youth outreach programs, and became a regular presence in policy discussions with the Michigan Department of Corrections. Slowly, his reputation grew. He met with governors, spoke at national criminal justice panels, and served as a living testament to redemption. In 2021, Michigan passed the Clean Slate Act, allowing certain nonviolent convictions to be automatically expunged. El-Alamin became one of the first beneficiaries. On paper, his criminal record disappeared. He proudly declared, "Today, I'm not a reformed felon, I'm a full citizen." But what laws can erase on paper, they cannot always erase in the mind. The question lingered: can someone who has lived violence or committed it truly escape its residue? Scars run deep. So do reflexes formed in survival. When police asked El-Alamin about the alleged choking incident, he refused to offer specifics. His attorney described the event as a misunderstanding between two consenting adults in a complicated relationship. But the hospital report told a harsher story: bruising and injuries consistent with strangulation, a charge considered serious assault under Michigan law. Once again, the specter of control, dominance, and suppressed rage traits that had defined El-Alamin's younger years seemed to resurface, and the haunting question returned: was this a lapse, or had that darkness always remained, quietly waiting? As news of Leon El-Alamin's arrest broke, the reaction across Michigan was swift and bitterly divided. The woman at the center of the case, whose identity was kept private, filed for a restraining order and declined all attempts at out-of-court mediation. While she remained silent publicly, her presence loomed large in every headline, every heated conversation. Some rushed to defend El-Alamin. To them, this was either a personal vendetta or a politically motivated attack. They pointed to the hundreds of lives he had changed, the speeches he had given, the second chances he had helped create. Former program participants from the MAID Institute called him a mentor, a father figure, the only person who ever listened to people no one else would. But women's rights organizations and domestic violence advocates saw something else. They saw a powerful man, once again, being protected by the very system he once claimed to reform. One group, Justice for Survivors Michigan, released a statement. "We cannot excuse violence simply because the perpetrator has done good things. A man who strangles a woman cannot be a representative of justice." The political fallout was immediate. Democratic leaders in the state legislature found themselves cornered. El-Alamin had been a key voice in their criminal justice reform platform. Now, to stand by him looked like complicity, but to abandon him felt like betrayal of the very principles of redemption they championed. Even within Flint's black community, a place where El-Alamin held immense influence, the divide was palpable. Some felt deeply disappointed, especially knowing the alleged victim was a black woman. Others warned that the system, which had always been biased, was using this incident to erase a rare success story. "It doesn't matter what you build," one resident said. "They still see you as what you were." Through it all, El-Alamin stayed silent. No statement, no public defense, no apology. For a man known for his eloquence, his refusal to speak became its own statement. The man who once filled auditoriums with talk of forgiveness, accountability, and healing now offered none of it. The silence echoed louder than any words, and the gap it left was filled by speculation, anger, disappointment, and for some, betrayal. The first hearing took place in a modest courtroom in Genesee County. No television cameras, no grand declarations, no media team spinning narratives. Just Leon El-Alamin, silent between two attorneys, seated across from the woman he was accused of choking. The prosecution came prepared with a thick case file that included the victim's statement, the police report, photographs of injuries, and corroborating accounts from neighbors. They even presented phone data showing location tracking, message history, and a timeline of escalating tension between the two. But the most damning evidence was a secret recording allegedly captured by the victim of a man believed to be El-Alamin, shouting in anger. The sound of physical struggle was audible. One line stood out, "You think you can just walk away like that?" The defense didn't deny the argument occurred, but they framed it as a private dispute between two adults in a complicated relationship, insisting that any physical contact was unintentional. They emphasized El-Alamin's spotless post-prison record, his collaboration with law enforcement, and his work to reduce recidivism in Flint. But in court, El-Alamin's silence became his greatest liability. The man once praised for his persuasive voice now said nothing. No apology, no rebuttal, no acknowledgement of the pain or the scandal. For someone who had built his identity on public transparency, his refusal to speak left a vacuum. Legal experts noted that while silence is a right, it is also a strategy, and in this case, a risky one. Every unanswered accusation grew louder in that void. The court did not issue a final verdict that day, but El-Alamin was hit with a restraining order and travel restrictions. The networks of allies who once championed him began to distance themselves, not with condemnation but with silence eerily similar to his own. In politics, betrayal often comes from opponents, but for Leon El-Alamin, it felt like betrayal by the very image he had crafted, an untouchable symbol of redemption. Once it cracked, the courtroom revealed not a hero, but a man facing the same system he once claimed to be. As Leon El-Alamin's case moved further into the public spotlight, it stopped being just a domestic violence allegation. It became a referendum on an entire philosophy, on the belief that people who've done wrong can truly change, and that society should forgive them without reservation. If someone like El-Alamin, who had been elevated as a national example of rehabilitation, could fall back into violence. What did that say about the movement behind him? Opinion pieces began to flood the press. The Atlantic ran a piece titled, "Is Redemption Unconditional?" It questioned whether society had ignored warning signs because they were too enamored with El-Alamin's rise. ProPublica published a report examining his nonprofit's lack of financial transparency, and interviews began to surface from former staff who described the work environment as controlling and intimidating. Even more damaging were whispers from women who had once dated El-Alamin or worked closely with him. They spoke anonymously about a pattern of behavior: emotional manipulation, dominance, masked as mentorship, moments of volatility that felt just beneath the surface. While none of these accounts resulted in legal action, they painted a troubling portrait. On the victim's side, the woman at the center of the case released a written statement through her attorney. In it, she described the final months of their relationship: the isolation, the veiled threats, the silencing. She wrote, "I fell in love with a man the world called a role model, but behind closed doors, he wasn't a politician or a reformer. He was someone who wanted me quiet." That statement landed like a hammer blow. Even those who once defended El-Alamin grew quiet. Some quietly deleted their supportive tweets. Others issued bland corporate statements distancing themselves. Foundations pulled funding. Partners suspended collaborations. The fallout was swift and merciless. For a man who once stood at the center of a national movement, the silence surrounding him now felt like exile. What remained was not just a legal battle, but the unraveling of a narrative once held sacred. Because in the end, the greater damage wasn't to El-Alamin's reputation, it was to the idea he once embodied. If he failed, did that mean the system failed? Or worse, did it mean the system had never really worked at all? Beneath the inspirational public persona, Leon El-Alamin's private life was far more entangled with power, emotion, and control. As the pedestal cracked, those who had once kept quiet began to speak. Former friends, colleagues, and even some beneficiaries of his nonprofit opened up to the media, no longer shielded by his reputation. One former manager at the Maid Institute recalled how El-Alamin often blurred personal and professional boundaries, enforcing moral standards he didn't live by. A woman who briefly dated him described him as charming and idealistic until he felt threatened. Then his eyes changed. Cold, controlling. These weren't criminal accusations, but they weren't dismissed either. They began to form a pattern: power, control, and a simmering need for dominance. And then came the victim's full written statement submitted through her legal team. In it, she painted a chilling portrait of psychological erosion: text messages laced with threats, isolation from friends, and arguments that always ended with a look of intimidation or a hand tightening around her throat. She wrote, "I loved a man the world celebrated, but in my bedroom, he wasn't a leader or a reformer. He was someone who made me feel small, afraid, and invisible." That statement became a turning point. El-Alamin did not respond publicly, but his political allies began to pull away. Social media accounts were scrubbed, interviews were canceled, collaborations were paused. His image, once sculpted with care, was now in ruins. In politics, the sharpest fall comes not from your enemies, but from your image collapsing under its own contradictions. For El-Alamin, the betrayal wasn't just from the public. It was from the myth he himself had created. A myth that promised redemption, but hid a truth that no one, perhaps not even El-Alamin, wanted to face. There are wounds the law can't erase, and parts of a man that rehabilitation might never reach. At last, after nearly 2 months of legal maneuvering and mounting public tension, Leon El-Alamin's case reached a quiet conclusion. There were no protesters at the courthouse, no news vans, no press conference. Instead, El-Alamin accepted a plea deal, a suspended sentence, 18 months of probation, 100 hours of community service, and mandatory anger management classes. The prosecution cited a lack of witnesses willing to testify and a desire to avoid a drawn-out media circus. Legally, he walked free. But the true cost was never measured in jail time. He resigned from the Michigan House of Representatives immediately after the plea. No speech, no statement. His office was cleared out over a weekend. the website for Made Institute went dark. Projects tied to his name lost funding. His presence in public life faded, not with a bang, but with deliberate erasure. For some, El-Alamin's downfall was a sobering reality check. Redemption is real, but it's not infallible. For others, it was betrayal. The man who stood for second chances had used that chance to rebuild a platform only to fall through it. And then came the larger, more painful question. How do we measure a person's worth when their past and present collide? Does expunging a record also erase the deeper shadows? Can public success truly hide private harm? And when a symbol falls, who is really hurt? The man or the people who believed in him? The story of Leon El-Alamin is no longer just about a courtroom or a choking allegation or a fractured relationship. It's about what we believe justice should look like, what we expect it to fix, and the consequences when it doesn't. Because in the end, this wasn't just the collapse of a man. It was the collapse of a narrative, a promise, a hope. And in that silence, after the gavel fell, one haunting question remained. Were we too quick to believe in redemption without truly understanding the man behind it?